Hi. So, I just finished watching Gary's WTF number 352 Bent Reflections video, and I'll probably name this video the read of that because he's currently unsubscribed to me. And in that video he goes on to say that all of his arguments are crystalline and perfect, and whatever's being thrown at him, he's just knocking it away like a wiffle ball. And he doesn't respect my arguments, so I ask you as my audience members to what I present in this video, if you would please comment on my particular arguments as, you know, whether or not you think there's any validity to them. And so let me go ahead and jump in with the infamous imposition argument. For imposition, I've been arguing that imposition, kind of like the word parasite, is connotatively negative. And so when one views their own life as an imposition, or anyone else's life, or the act of procreation as imposition, that is necessarily being seen as a negativity. Right out of the gate, it's a negativity. So if it's a negativity, then the rest of the argument, of course, is going to fall in line psychologically to a negative predisposition, and that this is what, you know, Gary and perhaps Benatar is guilty of using. And so in the past I've mentioned, well, talk about importation. You're imported here from a nothingness to a somethingness, and that would be kind of the verb form. But then I thought about it, and I realized we are not impositions, we are compositions. We are compositions that are put together. And so if Gary started speaking, mentioning, wait, we're compositions, this reminds me, composition reminds me of putting together nicely and neatly with a background of design that allows us to be native to our own planet, that we're congruous with that, that we're in harmony with that, that we're musically, harmoniously interweaved with the world to which we're indigenous to. I believe Corey Anton mentioned that. We're indigenous to this planet. Okay, so composition connotatively is not a negative word, and I don't believe it's necessarily a positive word, but it definitely undermines the negativity that is inherent in the usage of imposition. So that's argument number one. Please comment below whether or not you think that is a sound, reasonable description of our being as composition as opposed to imposition on a rudimentary level. Let me think. Let me think. Maybe we should play a little bit of Gary's video, see if I can remind myself what he was saying.
Preposterous exaggerations, you know, that are the modern jackass human, you know, just one stunt after another. You know, let's do something preposterous, do stupid, break our leg.
Okay, he's talking about the stupidity of humans, like leaving your baby in the back seat of a car while you go into the grocery store and your baby dies, or using drugs, you know, during pregnancy, or innumerable other stupid things. Thanks, Canada, for that information, by the way. But anyway, innumerable stupid things that humans do that allow us to generalize. Here's the second argument. Do these specific events generalize and represent the masses of humanity? Or is the antinatalist argument not about those individuals whom are suffering because they have a psychological predisposition of viewing their world as negative? I'm not denying that the world has its negative valuations, that it has its negative currents that we have to move through. But I am denying that one has to uphold a psychological predisposition of negativity towards the world that has these particular conditions. So that's argument number 2. Please comment below, is that a sound argument? What kind of argument is it? That's the thing about the world as the condition of the world with all of its activity, whether it's atrocious activity, naturally occurring unbearable carnage activity, or civilized activity, that all of this activity is but a game. Gary keeps referring to this is a game of life, the game of life. You know, in the game and in the equation. He uses these as metaphors for the actuality of the currents that are happening in humanity. And so he believes that he has a sound argument because he can call it a game, and then he can say the equation, his argument. See, I'm not denying Gary's argument to be sound. I'm denying the exteriority of the argument. So hopefully you might understand that, meaning that he's kind of in a walnut shell over there. And inside of his worldview, one should not have kids and one should not procreate because of a logical argument that's been claimed. But that is not the whole of human consideration. So that's argument number, I guess, 3 and 4. Whether or not the world and metaphor and equations is a game as 3, and as 4, the I always make certain to lose my train of thought, at least in one section of my video. The last thing I said is number 4.
You know, writhed in agony on the ground and gave everybody a good laugh. This is how people tell jokes now. They basically tell jokes by failing preposterously and then laughing at failure. And somehow it's funny to laugh at that.
Okay, enough about that. Yeah, Gary's retort to my imposition argument, argument number 1, is that I'm denying the future, that I'm denying a future individual to exist. Whenever I say there is no imposition, he says, then you're denying the future individual that will exist, that will come in adversary against its environment and hence sense itself as a negative fact on the world, a needy machine. So if one views themselves in a moment, in an instant, or whether or not that moment becomes dilated into one's personality, is this still not a psychological predisposition? That's argument number 6. Is the negativity found, is noticing yourself in a world that is negative, is that a psychological predisposition or a psychological position that one holds and holds on to in order to make the claims that the antinatalists make? In other words, are the antinatalists simply holding up a psychological predisposition that aligns with a logical argumentation? Put your comment below. Yeah, I'm not certain what to say about need machines, but this idea, not about need machines, this idea that when you're in pain and you're having an experience, that experience is not able to be segmented off. If you're having a pleasurable experience, then that pleasurable experience exists as a fact of your experience, of your existence. And so the relationships that are made to that experience to say that that experience necessarily comes out of a lessening of deprivation strictly. See, that's the argument, is that all pleasure is a lessening of deprivation, and if there is any more in the margins, that is to be overlooked, that's excluded because it's minimal. So I guess what I'm saying is Luddite Return's hedonic asymmetry seems to outline the idea that there is and I'm not going over the asymmetry proper, but that there is a value to all positive experiences, and there's a value to all negative experiences, and that the associative relationship between these is not to be aligned by necessity, but only by psychology, by a psychological outlook, as being a presence of the lack of negativity. So that's argument, what is that, 7? I think that's 7. Maybe it's 8. I think it's 7. Hell, what did I say? Anyway, comment below. Really? Did I go over 8 arguments or 7 arguments already? I don't know about that. All I know is Gary thinks that all conditions are not, all arguments are not valid, and that he has got the market cornered. And what was I going to get at? Yeah, I guess I want to mention something like he mentions duplicity as if duplicity is I mean, duplicity is a negative connotative word because it's talking about, fooling somebody or switching something, taking advantage of something. But I don't, if there's, and then in the same tone he'll use imposition, which is negative, but he accepts imposition, but he doesn't accept duplicity in his argumentation. So his premises stem off of a negative imposition, and yet his arguments are against duplicity, which is also a negative implication. Sorry if I'm stumbling. Anyway, and so the point is, if I can keep my head on straight. The point is I come back at him with the idea that duplicity is not all that bad. Duplicity is a feature of our language that we use that describes not just negative things, but types of thinking. To have a duplicitous thought, or a duplicitous, kind of like carrying two contradictions together at the same time and absorbing their exteriority and their interiorities, and how they're opposed to one another, but how they're set up against one another also. And I guess that's my point about antinatalism. Antinatalism, in a nutshell, seems, the interiority seems to be based on the psychology and on the belief that the world is negative, the belief that pain is inherently and always bad, that suffering is always bad, that you're unable to romance that pain, that if you fall in this psychological predisposition of the antinatalist, then you can see how the arguments are logically sound. Or maybe I shouldn't say sound. Valid. Valid but not sound. I'm trying to think of the other word other than valid. Valid but not sound. I thought they brought it up. Anyway, so I'm trying to think of how to phrase the argument on this one and get your feedback on it, see whether or not you guys think I have anything. That the interiority of the nutshell of antinatalism with the psychological predisposition towards negativity can find a soundness in the arguments presented by the antinatalists. That's an interior argument. The exteriority of the argument is the world, it's all the practices of the world, it's all human consideration about all valuation and one's relationship to one another. In this video, Gary says we are gangs of people that only give a shit about our gang and about the increase of our gain. And so he doesn't look at this as an additive process. He looks at it in, once again, a negative limelight. Inherently, it's negative to want to increase like individuals around you, to want to carry on bloodlines. So some people value love, and they value an increase in like individuals as an increase in love. And so this is an exterior argument to the interior argument of antinatalism. So if you see the exteriority of antinatalism, all human practices and considerations, hence where love and likeness and growth and what might be considered pride or succession has a valuation in and of itself, that would be the exterior of the argument. If you see this difference between the interior and the exterior, I think that's argument 8. Just let me know whether or not you see a difference between the interior of their argument and an exteriority of their argument. I'm kind of drawing a blank. I know there's more. Let me feed off of Gary's video again and see if anything comes to mind. Pop ahead here.
Unsupported theory that sentience and the welfare of a feeling thing is at the core of value. Ooh, what a crazy idea. That's got like God and Jehovah written all over it, huh?
Okay, so there he's talking about the interiority of the individual that's experiencing the negative life. Whether by conditions of the world or by psychological conditions, it doesn't matter. These individuals, from their vantage point, are experiencing a negativity towards life, and this is the welfare of these individuals. Whether or not anyone cares about that, and then he tosses it with Jehovah. He throws gods over it. I like the idea, but to take a snapshot of all the variances that occur in that individual's existence is still relative back to that individual. Whether or not that individual is at that time ready to end their life is up to that individual. Whether or not the negatives are so harsh that the mere existence of their existence relative to their considerations of their values, they still stay alive. The welfare that is given is obviously enough. It's just not good enough for Gary. Does that argument make sense? If so, it's number 9. Go ahead and mention it. I'd like to hear. Thanks.
No, I think Kantian ethics has God written all over it. Yeah, the human-centric, humans know best.
I don't in any way want to undermine Gary's attempt at negating the very biblical ritual of you know a man by his fruits or a person by their fruits, and that the fruits are, how to say it, people, that the fruits are people, or facts about that person, what that person has produced for humanity. That is how you know the person. So if you know somebody that hasn't produced anything, then you biblically would look down upon them. But in Gary's world, you would think that they were just fine and relative to anybody else. So he's undermining biblical tradition, showing so much of our adherence to biblical memes that have transcended time, so accepted and under the radar that here he is challenging that, shows that there is a deconstructive process to that vantage point, because he's in the process of deconstructing it by making these arguments that go against it. But according to Derrida, and I adhere to this to a great extent, every argument, every position can be deconstructed. The trace of it can be moved through it and outside of it. The center of it can be dislocated and moved outside of it, so that the totality of the thing is found outside of the thing. The totality of the argument is found outside of the argument. This brings up the interiority and exteriority idea. So I don't think that. Okay, so how do I make this an argument? People's cultural traditions have aligned with biblical notions in a lot of ways, and they're still successive, meaning they still have offspring, the next generation. So the biblical mean is accepted as true, the most true, because the most successful life, if you believe in the Bible, is those who have the fruits. So by definition of what successive means, you're succeeding something. And so because of that, one wants to look at the positivity that's found in that. I don't know. Whoop. Let's scratch that, because I'm considering it at the same time I'm trying to argue it. So I'll bounce over that one. Back to Gary.
Yeah, the reasoning human. Right there, Kant was in big trouble. As soon as he said the words reasoning human. Oops, failure. Scheming human, you mean. Convenient truth. These people are all like Dorian Grays.
Okay, so if one's life is successive and viewed internally and externally in their environment as positive, and it happens to align with biblical memes, is this person to necessarily view their world automatically and instantaneously as something negative and awful. It appears that the people who are antinatalists, for the most part, are people that don't have kids, and they, according to Luddite, there's an argument for pessimism, that because they don't have kids, they're pessimistic, and that's also a biblical meme. So, I don't know. I still am not going to make an argument here. Not yet. But notice how he just went from reasoning human to scheming human. And so he's going to move every benign or neutral or positive definition a step towards the negative. The more Gary moves all pawns on his chessboard towards the negative, where the black, supposedly the darkness, the absence, the nothingness, is taking over the white, the light, the presence. And by saying this, I mean nothing racial, but this notion of this promulgation of bringing negatives step by step in covalence closer, absence closer to presence, then he can get your mindset to view things as negative, kind of like he's saying a scheming as opposed to a reasoning individual. Everyone knows that scheming has a negative connotation to it, compared to the word rational. So here he is again being guilty of moving a pawn towards the negative and then basing the following argument off of that negative. That would be number 8 or number 9? If you know, write it down in the comments.
They just keep distorting the mirror, to make it reflect on them the way they want to see themselves. So they just keep manipulating and evolving the mirror.
Okay, so people are manipulating a mirror about themselves so that they see themselves in the best limelight, and that this is somehow not a true thing. This is not a human activity, that humans are indigenous to the planet. Humans are having this mental process, and yet here goes Gary once again saying that this is a negative, that they're just hoisting themselves up in a limelight that is bullshit, and if they come to the ground, they'll see the truth of the mud that's holding up their mirror.
Rather than improving themselves, they just change the reflection. So the real painting in the back room is a hideous monstrosity of an asshole, and they keep evading that reality because the mirror is a distorted vision. So they just vainly stay in front of the mirror saying how wonderful they are, how great they are, while their portrait gets uglier and uglier, dumber and dumber, and slothier and slothier. And that's all they really are, is intellectual sloths.
Okay, now he might be considering me in that description, in an intellectual sloth. Sloth, because it's slow, has, to some degree, a negative connotative value to it. You don't want to be slow like a sloth, but why not? Because of what the Bible says, the quick and the dead. So Gary would be used as a biblio-meme. Now, the thing that presents slothfulness as negative is biblical. So here Gary is duplicitous, in that in one case he'll move against a biblical meme, and in the next case he moves for a biblical meme. And so being slothful is negative because of this biblical meme. So he doesn't like Hofladay being slow with his process, finding out that Gary's values are debased because they're not valid, because they don't consider all other human consideration. He can lord over everybody that he wants. Thanks, Orwell, for mentioning that, by the way, that term. He lords over the individuals that he brings closest to him. So if you look at him, he's like a highly tapered volcano, and he sits at the top of the volcano and thrashes down, but invites the people up. So he lords over them, those that abide by his preconditions, his arguments as preconditions, as the case, in other words.
Can't put two ideas together logically, fairly, sensibly, reasonably, ever. Because if they started doing that, they'd have to see the truth, which is they're just scheming assholes, accepting the convenient escape hatch wherever possible. Yep, put it in somebody else's backyard. Shove it in somebody else's backyard. That's the only game in town for most reasoning human beings, is finding a way to evade responsibility, evade accountability, evade the blame.
Gary has a lot coming in terms of accountability, and I say that as a spiritual man. I'm thinking that the idea that the reasoning individual is but scheming to plot to put everything in their neighbor's backyard is complete horseshit. I believe that people that raise kids, for the most part, are capable of raising those kids in a particular fashion. And it's not about God, now I forget the word. It's about survivability. It's not about prosperity. It's about survivability. If you can produce a child in the world, and that child grows up and reproduces, even if they are statistically low education, low poverty, low maybe intelligence, maybe they're deformed in some way, they still subsist in a realm of survivability. So Gary wants a medium of value to everyone's life. He wants them to get what they deserve relative to some work ethic that he's proposing, relative to how his view of the economy should be. Oh, God, I got in an argument with Gary months ago about whether or not we're inflating our debt $80 billion a month, and he's like, that's bullshit, and I said, that's real, and I pulled it up, and he still was in denial about that. He has, like with his general arguments, he has a certain perception of how the economy works that I don't think is necessarily grounded in the truest description of how the economy works. Anyway, that's just a side note. Let's see what else he's got.
There's the blood all over their hands and pretend they're okay. Nope. They're just as scummy as scum comes. And the animals have the excuse of ignorance. We do not. We have...
Yeah, we don't have the excuse of ignorance, and so we do it anyway, and we do it for emotional reasons. Justification is found outside of reasonability. If you want to have a kid, you can have a kid for an emotional reason. I'd even say for matching up with natural harmonics. If the world has brought you a lover, and that lover has matched up, as a man, if your lover's ovulation cycle matches your sexual activity, then you're in harmony with that lover, not only via just their presence alone, but how you interact with that presence alone. There is a harmony, and I say a harmony because these are windows of time in which you're allowed procreative possibility, and you don't want to miss that particular moment if you're out of harmony with nature, if you're out of harmony with lovers, if you're out of harmony, then you won't procreate. I suppose that's fine as well. I mean, that's my path. But I view the process as a type of harmony. And yet when I went to his room to argue that, he just immediately said, "I don't believe in that shit." And I was like, I can't even have a conversation with this guy because he's not even open to the idea of time, tempos, windows, and cycles that define harmonies, acute relationships to other frequencies and other momentums with people. I'll probably get into trouble for saying this. Anyway, those are my, I guess that makes 10. How do I make that in an argument? That there are harmonies in the world, and that these harmonies allow us procreative possibility if one allows themselves to align with the harmonies. It's almost like we're conditioned through predestination and materialism to move through these harmonies, but our stochastic, free-willed nature allows us to rub against that, push against it, move against the harmonies, and hence procreation doesn't occur for many, many people. And it doesn't occur to many, many people simply because the case of their life doesn't allow it. But anyway, so if you believe that there's harmonies in the world intrinsically, in how we move as material beings, whether or not you believe in determination or not, yeah, that's my number 10 argument. Or do you believe that there's harmonies? Okay, so that being said, maybe Amendum will respond to me finally. He's never openly responded to every one of my criticisms. He'll go through Hothloday. He'll badmouth Luddite. He'll just kind of scat me to the side and not really dive into what it is I'm saying because he doesn't believe what I'm saying has any merit. So if you believe that what I'm saying has any merit, let me know, because if the great deal of you disagree with all of these things that I'm mentioning, then, you know, I need to reconsider my my desire to try to communicate in oppositions to Gary's arguments. It seems as if it would be absurd for me to just continue if nobody agrees with anything that I'm saying. So I feel like an island in a lot of ways, and so this video is my test video to see how much of an island I live on and how much I don't. Anyway, yeah, what else to say? Here, let's play a little more of his video. Let's drag this out.
The liability of convenient distortion and perversion of the truth that has become...
Of the truth! Here he is propagating his notion of truth once again. So, people are logocentric around truth. They see truth, and then if they see it as an ism, a true ism, something that's blatantly true, something that is about the truth, but not the truth itself, is like a truism. And so you can chant around the truism, and if you're not aligned with Gary's notion, once again, of what is true, then you're maligning it, according to him. You're maligning it. But are you maligning it if the structure of your historical dialectic has led you to, and your internal monologue has led you to, a position that is discongruous with Gary's position? In other words, his notion of what is true is not true in all cases because it's not viewed as true by more than one people, meaning there's such a thing as truth upon agreement. Truth upon agreement. So if you get multiple people agreeing that something is true, then you say that that's true. But when you step back from it, you see the truism of it, then you see an exteriority of it and you walk away from it. I guess this would be like argument number 11. Is Gary's notion of truth really true? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Quite obvious. With the invention of the telescope and the microscope, we can see the truth. And people have decided to say, fuck that. That's no fun. Let's make up a silly story about how being a human means something besides being a colossal sack of shit, an exploitionist, hypocritical, duplicitous motherfucker.
Okay, so that's what you are if you're a human. You're duplicitous, you're a motherfucker. I mean, once again, that's moving the pawns towards negativity. It's viewing everything psychologically as not only negative, but intended to be negative or inherently negative. Intended to be negative, viewed as negative, or inherently negative. Gary keeps moving the boundaries in this direction because he needs you to view your life as scat, as shit, as duplicitous and wrong-headed, irrational, off-center, out of whack, fucked up, beyond belief, foobar. You know, you are nothing. You're crap right out of the gate. Then once you're in that vantage point and you absorb that internally into yourself, into your monologue, then you can start seeing the alignment of the antinatalist argument. Then you can start piecing it together and saying, yes, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense. Before you walk into a space of viewing yourself as negative, viewing yourself as an imposition, viewing yourself as duplicitous. This is why I made an argument that duplicity is a process of the mind. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But my whole point in bringing this up is that Gary seems to want to, once again, move the pawns of negativity and absence towards positivity and presence and say, this is what we are. This is the foundation. This is what we've found. This is what Gary's found. This is Gary's testimony. Gary's videos are Gary's testimony. It doesn't mean you have to align with them. It doesn't mean that they're true. They're true for him. That's how he views it. I just don't think that he sees it any other way. And that's the problem. Do you guys view that Gary is seeing truth in his own eyes, but do you believe that that truth is the truth? Is it your truth? Do you align with everything that Gary's saying? Do you believe everything that he's saying as true? Or do you not? See, there's this notion that the individual cannot be completely segmented off and view a positivity of their environment in all conditions, in all physiological conditions. Anyway, I guess that's argument 11. Is this going to be an hour?
Who will exploit, abuse, torture, anything if it's to its personal advantage or the advantage of its buddies, its gang. Yeah, that's as far as they think. That's as deep as they think. Just bigot all the way down.
Okay, so Gary here is noticing an interiority of other people's type of arguments and their existence, and that he is exterior to that. And he's viewing it from the outside. He doesn't view it from the inside. What happens if Gary got inside the mind of this supposed gang member? But what he means by that is family member. So even there, gang and family are thrown together as being, or tribe as being negative. So once again, here's another pawn move of negative connotation that Gary wants to move. So his sleight of hand is to come up from behind and say, no, once again, it's this way, not this way. These guys are shit and they're scum. They're the ones that go to the football games.
And it's all they got. Yep. It is convenient to the liabilities of their bad habits and irresponsible impositions.
There he is, impositions. If it was compositions, what would he say? Your irresponsible compositions. Your irresponsible compositions. You composed the child. You weaved its mind through all of the time and all of the connections. You weaved its body. You were there for the child. You brought the child. You weaved into the child whatever you had, and the child comes out in a particular way. You composed that child. You did not impose that child.
No.
Go on, motherfucker, Gary. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me how wrong I am.
There's no news. What am I going to do about Paul's ego? Played some more video games, and yeah, it's okay, but gee, it's kind of a colossal waste of time. What else is news? She'll be serious, promised to make a video, but she probably won't because she's a wimp. Everybody else is on crack. Nobody else has anything to say.
Except for me, except for the channel that he moved away from. You know, and except for his unable to get a grip on what Luddite Returns is really saying, or what I believe he's really saying. You know, it's like he won't get a grip around those ideas because they run contrary to what he said. Now, he even told me, I'm unsubscribing to you because you are doing everything you can to undermine 30 years of my work. And I thought, holy shit, that's 30 years of his work, and he unsubscribes to me because he sees that the premises that he's putting forth have to be accepted initially, and then they have to be believed in a certain way, and they have to be viewed in a certain psychological connotative value, and then his logic applies. It's not just a cakewalk with Gary.
Most of the old community is missing in action, and the ones that are back are, I mean, Snake Plissken, his last two videos were such layers of convoluted psychobabble, they might as well have been Greytex videos or the Contobot videos. Complete crap. You know, about, oh yeah, we're all too dumb to figure out we're being manipulated.
Okay. In no way do I want to lessen the carnage that happens in the world, because there's a lot of stat droppers saying anytime you're going to say that suffering is not good, look at all of the suffering in the world, and then they'll stat drop all the negatives. And one day we will die as a process of our existence, and we need to face that. And through our existence, we run up against adversarial and complicated challenges that we need to overcome, or we suffer the consequence of not properly overcoming them. And this becomes the burden of not being congruous with the way the world is, the facts of your own life. And so this facing your death with a view that it was all worthless in the first place is a nihilist point of view. Now, Gary will deny that he's a nihilist, but he is reducing all value except pain and sensual value, hedonic value. He will do everything to dismantle all the other valuations that you have throughout all different parameters and I want to say translucent relationships that appear between individuals and items and things that you love and cherish. He's you know, he's got it in him to see it that way because he pets the cat and he sees the pretty and he says these things. So he's got it in him to see the positivity and to not always move to the negative. But no, he insists on psychologically moving everything to the negative. So, I don't know. Once again, he doesn't think that the arguments that are coming at him have any value whatsoever, and that's why I don't attempt to move towards them anymore. This should hopefully be my last video about antinatalism, so I'm going to title it that with the word antinatalism in front of it, and hopefully you guys all enjoyed what I'm saying and I made some sort of sense, and you put comments below saying how you relate to what it is I'm saying, and I can learn something from you guys about my own thinking process, and hopefully I gave you guys something to think about. Thanks for your time. Bye.